Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to explore the fascinating life and legacy of Erasmus of Rotterdam. On this first slide, you'll see his basic details. He lived from around 1466 to 1536. He was a prince of the humanists, a scholar, a reformer, and a prolific author. We'll also look at some of his most important literary works. Over the course of this presentation, we'll delve into his contributions to Renaissance thought, education, and reform. So, let's get started and discover more about this influential figure. Now, let's take a closer look at Erasmus of Rotterdam's literary legacy. This slide outlines the key areas of his work, starting with his letters and overall legacy, which reflect his influence and ideas. We then move into his educational works, emphasizing his commitment to learning and teaching. Next, we have his writings on free will and religious topics, showcasing his engagement with theological debates of his time. The Handbook of the Christian Soldier is a notable work that offers guidance on Christian conduct. The colloquies, or colloquia, highlight his skill in dialogue and practical religious and moral discussions. The Praise of Folly stands out as one of his most famous satirical works, critiquing societal and church follies with wit and sharpness. The Adages, or Adagia, reflect his collection of wise sayings and proverbs, revealing his insights into human nature. Moving back in history and thought, we see how Erasmus's writings fit within the broader historical and intellectual context of the Renaissance. Finally, the slide asks who Erasmus was, setting the stage for understanding his life and influence, and then provides a roadmap for the entire presentation with the table of contents. All of these points help us grasp the depth and breadth of Erasmus's literary legacy and its significance in shaping modern Christian and humanist thought. Let's take a closer look at Erasmus, a key figure in the development of humanist scholarship. Born in 1466 in Rotterdam, Erasmus's early life was marked by humble beginnings, but his intellectual curiosity set him on a remarkable path. He was deeply influenced by the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, which he studied extensively. Erasmus believed in the power of education and the importance of returning to the original sources to understand the true meaning of Christian teachings. His work was revolutionary because he emphasized critical thinking, human-centered learning, and the need for reform within the Church. Through his writings and scholarship, Erasmus became a central figure in the Northern Renaissance, shaping how scholars thought about religion, education, and human nature. His life's work exemplifies the journey from a curious youth to a dedicated humanist scholar, aligning perfectly with our theme of the birth and making of a humanist thinker. Let's start by looking at Erasmus of Rotterdam's early life and literary legacy. He was born around October 28, 1466, in either Rotterdam or Gouda in the Netherlands. Interestingly, he was the illegitimate son of a priest, which adds a unique dimension to his background. His education began at the Brethren of the Common Life School in Deventer, where he studied under Alexander Hegius. This early exposure was crucial because it introduced him to Christian humanism, a movement that would deeply influence his thinking. In about 1485, Erasmus entered the Augustinian monastery at Stein and was ordained as a Catholic priest in 1492. His journey then took him to the University of Paris, specifically the Collège de Montaigu, starting in 1495, where he studied theology. Here, he became increasingly critical of the scholastic rigidity that dominated university life, something that pushed him toward new ways of thinking. A pivotal moment came in 1499 when he first visited England. There, he formed close friendships with Thomas More and John Colet. These relationships were more than personal. They marked significant turning points in his intellectual development, shaping his ideas and approach to humanism. Later, Erasmus spent several years in Italy from 1506 to 1509. During this time, he earned his doctorate in theology at Turin and immersed himself in Greek scholarship. This period was essential because it broadened his understanding of biblical texts and classical literature, fueling his literary and theological work. So, in summary, Erasmus's early life was marked by a strong educational foundation, exposure to Christian humanism, and formative experiences across Europe. These elements laid the groundwork for his lasting literary legacy, which aimed to reform and revitalize Christian thought through a critical and human-centered lens. Erasmus of Rotterdam is best known for his incredible literary legacy, even though he never held a permanent academic position. Instead, he was supported by patrons and the sales of his books across Europe, which allowed him to focus on his scholarship. Throughout his life, he lived in various countries: England, France, the Netherlands, Italy, Basel, and Freiburg, each place contributing to his diverse intellectual environment. His most productive period was in Basel, between 1521 and 1529, and again from 1535 to 1536. During this time, he worked closely with the famous printer Johann Froben, which helped spread his ideas widely. Despite his influence, Erasmus remained independent. He advised important figures like Emperor Charles V and several popes, but he did not depend on any church or royal patronage for his work. Another remarkable aspect of Erasmus was his extensive correspondence, over 3,000 letters, exchanging ideas with almost every major thinker of his time. This network helped shape the intellectual landscape of the Renaissance. Erasmus died on July 12, 1536, in Basel, where he was laid to rest in the Basel Minster. Throughout his life, he was truly a wandering scholar, constantly moving, engaging with different cultures, and continually contributing to the humanist movement that defined his legacy. Let's dive into the historical and intellectual context that set the stage for these transformative changes. Renaissance humanism was a key movement that emphasized the value of individual thought and classical learning, encouraging people to look back to the texts of ancient Greece and Rome for inspiration. This shift fostered a new appreciation for the human experience and the potential for personal achievement. Alongside this intellectual revival, the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Suddenly, books and ideas could be produced quickly and more affordably, making information accessible to a much wider audience. This technological breakthrough played a crucial role in spreading Renaissance ideas beyond the elite and into the broader population. At the same time, these cultural shifts contributed to calls for reform within the church. As people gained access to new ideas and questioned traditional authority, dissatisfaction grew. Many believed the church needed to address corruption and promote a more genuine spiritual experience. All these factors, Renaissance humanism, the printing press, and the desire for church reform, interconnected to challenge the old order and pave the way for profound societal changes during this period. Let's take a closer look at some key dates in Erasmus's life and the world around him. Erasmus was born around 1466 in Rotterdam, marking the beginning of a journey that would greatly influence the Renaissance and Reformation periods. In 1492, he was ordained as a priest, which was an important step in his spiritual and scholarly life. By 1499, Erasmus had met influential figures like Thomas More and John Colet, who shaped his humanist ideas. In 1500, he published his first edition of Adagia, a collection of Greek and Latin sayings that demonstrated his mastery of classical languages and his dedication to education. Fast forward to 1509, Erasmus published Praise of Folly, a satirical critique that challenged church practices and societal norms, an important work that reflected his critical thinking and wit. In 1516, he published the Greek New Testament, a groundbreaking effort that aimed to return to the original texts and promote biblical accuracy. A few years later, in 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses, sparking the Reformation, a pivotal moment in history that Erasmus closely observed and commented on. Then, in 1524, Erasmus authored On Free Will, engaging in the debate about human agency and grace, which was central to theological discussions of the time. Finally, in 1536, Erasmus passed away in Basel, leaving behind a rich literary legacy that continues to influence our understanding of the Renaissance, humanism, and early reform movements. These dates give us a timeline that highlights his intellectual pursuits and the broader changes happening during his lifetime. Let's talk about Erasmus of Rotterdam and his literary legacy. He was a key figure in the humanist movement, which focused on studying classical texts, emphasizing rhetoric, and valuing human dignity over the medieval scholastic approach. Northern humanism, which Erasmus was a leading exponent of, combined this classical learning with Christian piety, creating a unique blend that deeply influenced the period. The invention of Gutenberg's printing press around 1450 was a game-changer, allowing Erasmus's works to reach a much wider audience. In fact, he became Europe's first best-selling author, which shows just how influential his writings were. Erasmus also championed the idea of reading scripture in its original languages, Greek and Hebrew, rather than relying solely on church commentary. This was part of his push for a more direct and personal engagement with religious texts. He coined the phrase Philosophia Christi, which highlights his view that Christianity should be a lived philosophy centered on inner virtue, not just rituals or outward ceremonies. His ideas influenced major reformers like Luther and Calvin, as well as Catholic reformers, yet Erasmus himself refused to align with any one faction. He maintained a stance of intellectual independence, which kept him at the heart of the broader humanist movement. All of these elements, his emphasis on classical learning, scripture, and personal virtue, are vital to understanding the Northern Renaissance and its profound impact on European thought. This slide highlights the history of the adages, or adagia, which first appeared in print around 1500. Over the following decades, these sayings were expanded upon, reflecting a growing interest in capturing wisdom and practical truths through language. Today, there are over 4,000 proverbs in the collection, illustrating how rich and diverse this body of knowledge has become. These adages serve as timeless reflections of human experience, and they connect to our overall theme by showing how language preserves cultural insights across centuries. They remind us that wisdom, in many forms, endures and continues to shape how we think and communicate. Erasmus of Rotterdam's literary legacy is truly remarkable. Originally, he compiled about 818 Latin and Greek proverbs around 1500, and by the time of the definitive 1536 edition, this number had grown to over 4,150. What makes these proverbs special is that each one is accompanied by a detailed essay, drawing on classical literature, history, and moral philosophy to deepen our understanding. Some of the most notable essays include Dulce Bellum in Expertise, which translates to War is Sweet to Those Who Haven't Experienced It. This is a passionate anti-war treatise that challenges us to think about the true cost of conflict. Another important piece is Sileni Alcibiades, which explores the gap between outward appearance and inner worth, one of Erasmus's most personal essays. Interestingly, Erasmus's collection became the most widely reprinted book of the 16th century after the Bible, with over 60 editions during his lifetime. It played a significant role in establishing Latin proverbial culture across European courts, schools, and chanceries, really spreading humanist values throughout the continent. Now, when we talk about the adagia, we're referring to this vast collection and its significance. It's more than just a book. It's a reflection of Erasmus's effort to promote wisdom, classical learning, and moral insight. This work helped shape the intellectual landscape of Europe and remains a cornerstone of humanist thought. Let's take a look at this intriguing phrase from Erasmus' Adagia, published in 1508, Dulce Bellum in Expertise. This Latin expression translates to war is delightful to those who have had no experience of it. What this highlights is a common human tendency. People often romanticize or idealize war when they haven't actually endured its harsh realities. It connects to our broader theme of how perceptions of conflict can be vastly different from the reality, especially when viewed from a safe distance or through idealized narratives. This idea reminds us to be cautious of glorifying war without understanding its true costs and consequences. It's a powerful reminder that real experience often changes our perceptions, something important to keep in mind as we explore the complex nature of conflict throughout history. Today, I want to highlight one of Erasmus's most famous works, The Praise of Folly, or Morii Encomium, as it's originally called. Written in 1509 and published in 1511, this book is a key example of Erasmus's wit and his sharp critique of society and the church during his time. It's not just a humorous satire. It also carries a deeper message about human folly and the need for humility and reform. The work cleverly uses irony and parody to question the pretensions of scholars, clergy, and even the general populace. It's a perfect illustration of Erasmus's overarching goal, encouraging critical thinking and moral improvement, which ties directly into the broader themes of the Renaissance humanist movement. This book really cemented his reputation as a leading thinker and reformer, and it continues to be influential even today. Today, I want to highlight the fascinating literary legacy of Erasmus of Rotterdam, particularly through his work Morii Encomium, or The Praise of Folly. This satirical oration was delivered by Folly, personified as a witty and humorous figure, and was actually written in just a week while Erasmus was staying with Thomas More. The title itself is a clever pun on More's surname, since Moria means folly in Greek, making it a playful tribute to his friend. The speech is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, Folly praises the follies that make life more bearable, things like love, marriage, self-deception, and friendship. These are the human follies that, despite their flaws, bring joy and meaning to our lives. In the second part, Folly turns its sharpest criticism towards scholars, philosophers, lawyers, theologians, and rulers. Here, Erasmus lampoons their vanity and self-delusion, exposing how often these figures are caught up in their own arrogance and misguided pursuits. And there's a third part, which is often overlooked but incredibly profound, a serious meditation on Christian mystical folly, especially centered on the paradox of the cross. This section invites us to reflect on the deeper spiritual truths where folly and divine wisdom intersect. The work was dedicated to Thomas More and was beautifully illustrated by Hans Holbein the Younger in the famous 1515 Basel edition. Overall, Morii Encomium is not just a satire. It's a nuanced exploration of human folly, divine wisdom, and the importance of humility, topics that resonate deeply within the larger themes of Erasmus's work and the Renaissance humanist movement. Erasmus of Rotterdam was truly a literary giant of his time. By 1520, his works had gone through over 40 editions, making him a pan-European sensation. His writings not only influenced countless thinkers, but also inspired Martin Luther's critical stance against the Church. You can see his impact rippling through the works of Rabelais, Shakespeare, and Cervantes, shaping the course of European literature. Erasmus pioneered the ironic panegyric, a form that used satire to praise by exposing flaws, which was quite revolutionary. However, his bold ideas also led to trouble. His works were placed on the Index of Forbidden Books in 1559, yet they remain masterpieces of world literature to this day. Looking at the broader historical impact, Erasmus's satire targeted many of the corrupt figures of his time, popes and bishops who were often more worldly than spiritual, scholastic theologians engaged in empty debates, and kings and warriors who glorified war. He also criticized merchants obsessed with profit, monks who mistook ceremony for genuine piety, and pedantic scholars who valued form over substance. His key target was the hypocrisy and corruption within the church and society, as vividly illustrated in his work Morii Encomium. This satire didn't just entertain. It challenged and exposed the moral failings of powerful institutions and individuals, prompting reflection and debate. Overall, Erasmus's literary legacy and his sharp social critique significantly influenced the humanist movement and the broader push towards reform in Europe. Let's take a closer look at the colloquies, or colloquia familiaria, as they are formally known. These texts were first published in 1518, marking an important milestone in educational literature. Over time, they expanded to include a total of 59 colloquies, making them quite comprehensive. What's truly remarkable is that during their time, they became the widest-read textbook of the age, used extensively for learning and teaching. These colloquies played a vital role in shaping humanist education and providing practical language practice. They connect to our overall theme by exemplifying how educational materials evolved to meet the needs of learners and how they influence the dissemination of knowledge across Europe. So, in essence, the colloquies weren't just books. They were foundational tools that helped spread literacy and classical learning during the Renaissance. Now, let's explore Erasmus of Rotterdam's literary legacy. Originally, these works started as Latin conversation exercises for students, but Erasmus transformed them into witty satirical dialogues that are still remarkable today. By the final edition, he had composed 59 colloquies, which cover a wide range of social scenes, things like pilgrimages, marriages, horse trading, and in-life. One notable dialogue is The Shipwreck, where Erasmus discusses how sailors tend to pray only when they're in dire straits. This piece satirizes superstitious devotion and highlights human nature. Then, there's The Abbot and the Learned Lady, a bold feminist defense of women's education, quite radical for its time. Another interesting one is Pilgrimage for Religion's Sake, which gently mocks relic worship and the popular pilgrimages of the era. These colloquies weren't just entertainment. They were used as school texts across Europe, shaping the Latin prose style of a whole generation of humanists. So, Erasmus's colloquia were both educational tools and sharp social commentaries, making a lasting impact on European intellectual life. Today, I want to highlight a significant part of the spiritual guidance literature, published in 1503, called A Guide to Inner Christian Life. This work offers valuable insights into how we can deepen our spiritual journey and strengthen our faith. One key component of this guide is the Handbook of the Christian Soldier, also known by its Latin title, Enchiridion Militis Christiani. This book serves as a practical manual for living out our faith with discipline and purpose, much like a soldier preparing for battle. It emphasizes that the Christian life requires constant vigilance, resilience, and commitment, paralleling the discipline of a soldier. The core idea is that our spiritual journey is a kind of warfare, where we must be prepared to face temptations, doubts, and challenges with courage and steadfastness. Throughout this guide, you'll find that the focus is on inner strength and spiritual armor, qualities that help us stay true to our faith amid life's struggles. It reminds us that our true battle is within, and that cultivating virtues like humility, patience, and prayer are essential weapons. Connecting this to our overall theme, it underscores that living a Christian life isn't passive. It's active, intentional, and disciplined. By adopting the mindset of a soldier of Christ, we can navigate our spiritual battles more effectively and grow stronger in faith. So, as we move forward, keep in mind that this guide encourages us to see our spiritual journey as a battle worth fighting, armed with faith, virtue, and perseverance. Erasmus of Rotterdam's literary legacy is truly remarkable. The title of his work, The Enchiridion, is quite interesting because it means both handbook and short sword in Greek. This dual meaning reflects the idea that it's a tool for spiritual combat, a short sword to fight inner battles. He wrote this book at the request of a dissolute soldier's wife who wanted to help reform her husband. It's a practical guide, emphasizing that true Christianity isn't just about outward rituals or ceremonies. Instead, Erasmus argues that genuine faith is an inward disposition, centered on love, humility, and a deep knowledge of Scripture. The Enchiridion presents 22 rules, called canons, for living as a true Christian, all rooted in Scripture and classical philosophy. Erasmus was quite critical of the clergy, especially monks, priests, and bishops, who often prioritized elaborate ceremonies over authentic piety. What's really striking is how popular this book became. It was translated into many languages: English, Czech, Spanish, German, Polish, and by 1523 it had over 30 editions. It clearly resonated across Europe. In essence, the Enchiridion frames the Christian life as a kind of inner warfare, a constant struggle to align one's heart with true faith. It's a powerful reminder that spirituality isn't about external appearances, but about cultivating an authentic inner life. This theme ties directly into the broader Reformation ideas we're exploring, about moving away from superficial religion toward a more personal, heartfelt faith. Let's take a closer look at slide 19, which focuses on the Greek New Testament and its role in the debate over free will, particularly against the Reformers. This slide is titled, "The Greek New Testament on Free Will Against the Reformers," and it falls under the broader theme of biblical scholarship and the Reformation controversy. What we're seeing here is that the Greek New Testament has been central to these discussions because it provides the original language and nuance that can sometimes be lost or misunderstood in translation. When scholars analyze the Greek texts, they often find subtle differences in wording that impact how we understand concepts like free will. Against the Reformers, some biblical scholars argue that the Greek New Testament supports a view of human responsibility and free will that contrasts with the Reformers' emphasis on divine sovereignty and predestination. This is a significant point because it highlights how scholarly interpretation of the original texts can challenge or reinforce theological positions. Throughout this slide, the connection to our overall theme is clear. Biblical scholarship, especially when based on the Greek texts, plays a vital role in shaping and sometimes contesting theological debates that have shaped Christian history. It reminds us that understanding the original language and context is crucial in these ongoing discussions about faith, free will, and God's sovereignty. Erasmus of Rotterdam is truly a towering figure in literary history, especially when it comes to the Bible. He published the first printed edition of the Greek New Testament, which was a groundbreaking achievement at the time. Not only did he include his own Latin translation alongside the Greek text, but this edition also revealed some significant differences from the Vulgate, the Church's official Latin Bible. This caused quite a scandal because it challenged the traditional textual authority. Erasmus didn't just stop at printing. He added marginal annotations, known as annotations, where he argued for a more philological and historically grounded approach to reading the Bible. This was quite revolutionary because it emphasized understanding the text in its original context, rather than relying solely on established translations. Interestingly, Erasmus's work was inspired by earlier notes from Lorenzo Valla on the New Testament. Erasmus took Valla's ideas, edited, and expanded upon them, which helped shape his approach. His dedication of this work to Pope Leo X was intended as a tool for church reform, but it also drew fierce criticism from conservative theologians who saw it as a threat. Most importantly, Erasmus's Greek New Testament directly influenced later translations, including Luther's German Bible in 1522 and Tyndale's English New Testament in 1526. His edition, titled Novum Instrumentum, published in 1516, laid the foundation for many subsequent translations and helped shift biblical scholarship toward a more critical and original text-based approach. Erasmus of Rotterdam is often remembered for his profound literary legacy, especially in the context of the Reformation. When Luther's Reformation began in 1517, Erasmus was initially sympathetic to the calls for church reform. However, he made it clear that he refused to join Luther's movement. He believed that true reform should come from within the church itself, rather than through a schism or division. In his work on free will, published in 1524, Erasmus argued that human will cooperates with divine grace in the process of salvation. This was a significant point of contention because it stood in contrast to Luther's doctrine of predestination and divine determinism. Luther responded with De Servo Arbitrio, or On the Bondage of the Will, in 1525, which became their most direct and sharpest exchange on the topic. Erasmus then replied with Hyperaspists in 1526-27, further elaborating the Catholic position on free will. This debate is more than just a theological dispute. It highlights a fundamental divide between Protestantism, which emphasizes predestination, and Catholicism, which stresses free will. So, in summary, Erasmus's work on free will and his debates with Luther really helped to define the key theological fault lines that still influence Christianity today, between the ideas of divine sovereignty and human agency. Now, moving on to slide 22, let's talk about how reforming the way Europe's children were taught to think and write was a crucial part of educational development. This slide highlights some of the key works in this area, particularly focusing on Decopia. What's important here is understanding that these educational works aim to transform not just what children learned, but how they learned to think critically and express themselves more effectively. This was a shift from rote memorization to developing skills in original thought and clear writing. Decopia, for example, was a significant text that emphasized the importance of variety and richness in expression, encouraging students to expand their vocabulary and think creatively. It represented a broader movement to reform education, making it more engaging and better suited to cultivate independent thinkers. Connecting this to the overall theme, these reforms were about fostering a new way of thinking that emphasized human potential and individual expression, laying the groundwork for modern educational practices. They marked a pivotal move away from traditional methods towards a more dynamic, thoughtful approach to teaching and learning. Erasmus of Rotterdam's literary legacy is truly remarkable and deeply influential. His work De Copia Verborum et Rerum, published in 1512, is essentially a manual on how to achieve stylistic abundance and variety in Latin composition. It's fascinating because it demonstrates over 150 different ways to express the phrase, "Your letter pleased me greatly," showcasing the richness of language and the importance of eloquence. This exercise is actually one of the most celebrated in Renaissance rhetoric, emphasizing the value placed on persuasive and elegant writing. Then we have his book Institutio Principis Christiani, or The Education of a Christian Prince, published in 1516 and dedicated to the future Emperor Charles V. Here. Erasmus argues that rulers should be educated in virtue and wisdom rather than solely in military glory. This idea was quite revolutionary at the time and was heavily influenced by Plato's Republic, reflecting a belief in moral and intellectual development as the foundation of good leadership. Finally, his work De Puris Instituendis, or On the Education of Children, from 1529, advocates for gentle and stimulating teaching methods over corporal punishment. Erasmus believed that education should nurture curiosity and character, and his pedagogical ideals significantly shaped European grammar school education for more than 2 centuries. All of these writings, De Copia and his other pedagogical works, highlight Erasmus's commitment to humanist education, emphasizing virtue, eloquence, and kindness. They connect to the overall theme of how Renaissance humanism aimed to reform not just knowledge, but also how we teach and develop individuals. Now, let's turn our attention to the incredible legacy of Erasmus through his correspondence. Over 3,000 surviving letters give us a fascinating glimpse into his life, thoughts, and relationships. These letters are often referred to as the Republic of Letters, a term that highlights the vibrant intellectual community he helped foster across Europe. Through these writings, we see how Erasmus engaged with scholars, theologians, and humanists, exchanging ideas that shaped the ideas of the Renaissance and Reformation. This extensive network underscores the importance of communication and collaboration in advancing knowledge. Overall, Erasmus's letters not only reveal his personal thoughts, but also demonstrate how his influence extended far beyond his publications, helping to create a shared intellectual culture that still resonates today. Erasmus of Rotterdam is often celebrated for his incredible literary legacy, and one of his key contributions was embodying Ironicism, or the pursuit of reconciliation over conflict, which was quite revolutionary for his time. His ideas actually inspired Catholic reform efforts, such as those seen at the Council of Trent, showing how his influence extended well beyond literature into religious reform. He was truly ahead of his time when it came to religious tolerance, advocating for understanding and peaceful coexistence long before it became a widespread idea. Because of his lasting impact, the European Union named their Erasmus program in 1987 after him, emphasizing his role in promoting unity and learning across nations. Erasmus also influenced some of the greatest thinkers and writers, Montaigne, Shakespeare, Voltaire, and earned the nickname Prince of the Humanists. a title that still resonates today. His philosophical and cultural legacy is profound. He pioneered textual criticism and philology, which are essential for understanding ancient texts. His Greek New Testament, for example, shaped all modern Bible scholarship, and his collection of sayings, the Adagia, remains a treasure trove of Western wisdom. His colloquies offer a master class in satirical prose, and through his letters, he helped define the Republic of Letters, fostering a vibrant exchange of ideas across centuries. Erasmus authored over 100 works in Latin across various genres, blending literary and scholarly pursuits seamlessly. All of this together makes him a towering figure whose legacy continues to influence both our cultural and intellectual worlds today.